Okay, hello students, and welcome to the 7.2 reading guide discussion on the government of the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic was interesting. A lot of people aren't aware that there were two styles of government over the 2,000 year period of ancient Rome. We have 500 of those 2,000 years being a democracy or a republic like we have here in the United States, and then the other 1,500 years were pretty much a monarchy or an empire with an absolute leader. So, the Romans are around for 2,000. About a quarter of their time, 500 of those years, were dedicated to the democratic style of government. All right, so there was a historian. His name was Polybius, and he described the Roman government in three ways: aristocratic, democratic, and monarchical. And aristocratic means led by an elite few. Democratic means voted for, the leaders are voted for by the people, and the government is there for the people, by the people, for the people. And then monarchical means like a king or a monarch leader. So what he's saying is, he goes, you had a king style system, you had a democracy style system, and you also had a system where a few elite made decisions. Constitution, interestingly enough, the history of our United States. Our Constitution is a very important document. It's a system of rules in which a government is organized. And the key difference between that of the United States Constitution and that of the Roman Republic, you can go and see copies of the United States Constitution in the Federal Archives, but you cannot see any copies of the Roman Constitution. It was unwritten, and it was basically just based on traditions and customs, and so that could be changed as the time period moved on. The United States Constitution can only be changed through an amendment process. Separation of powers is when power is shared among different people with set roles. We have that here in the United States with our three branches of government. We'll talk more about that during our Pear Deck conversation about this particular section. After throwing the last king, the Romans didn't want to be ruled by a single man ever again. So they built their new system of government to make sure that no one person could become too powerful, and it actually worked for 500 years. The top leaders of the government were called the consuls, and so they were pretty much like the Roman Republic's presidents. They held equal power, and they could veto, which means to say no to. It's a Latin word, to say no to, stop action, or to forbid each other. So they were pretty much like our presidents. What was the term limit of a Roman official's time in office, and why did they put this in place? Well, the term limit was 1 year. So unlike our presidents serve, if you don't know, the term limit is 4 years. Unlike our presidents, the consuls can only serve for 1 year. And the whole idea of this was that even if someone was very powerful, they could not do much harm in that short of time. Well, the three branches of Roman government are a little bit different than our three branches. Their three branches are the assemblies, the Senate, and the magistrates. And our three branches of government, if you are not aware, is the executive branch, which is the president, the legislative branch, which is the House of Representatives in the United States Senate, and then lastly the judicial branch, the people that interpret the laws, the judges, the court system. How does the system of checks and balances work within the Roman government? Each branch had its own set of powers, it had its own role, and one branch could put a check or a stop on another branch for misusing its power. That is one of the most beautiful things about our government here in the United States, and we were going to talk in detail about this when we take a look at these slides about this section on Pear Deck. If we have taken anything from the Romans that have helped us immensely, it's this: the system of branches of government and having checks and balances where each branch is in charge of a certain thing, and they can keep the other branches from becoming too powerful. Although the system of checks and balances were in place in ancient Rome, there was a branch that had more power than others, and it was the Roman Senate. Here in the United States, I would believe that the branches are evenly balanced, and I'll talk about that, why I believe they are. But in ancient Rome, the Senate ended up having more power. What is the rule of law? It means the law applies to everyone. Even elected officials could be tried for violating the law after their term of office was over. And this is a issue, again, something that we've borrowed from the Romans here in the United States. We do have the rule of law. Elected officials cannot break laws. Even the president cannot break laws, or he will be held accountable. He could be arrested, which would be weird if your president was arrested. Usually that president, before any type of arrest would happen, they'd have to be removed from office. And we have a particular form of removal, which is called impeachment. Talk more about that later. Free Roman men were citizens of the Roman Republic. If both your parents were Roman citizens and you were a male, you would be a citizen at birth. Remember, we talked about how Rome was a patriarchal society in which the men were more important, and it's just it's not. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying that it's something that's right. It's just the way that things were in history in many cultures, where the men pretty much called the shots. And I'm not saying that's fair because I do not believe it is. But in Rome, it definitely was a male-driven society. Women were not even allowed to participate in any type of politics. Toga was a garment wrapped around the body. It was a Roman symbol of citizenship, and only citizens could wear it. There was something called toga status. If you had toga status, you were a citizen. Later on, the Romans actually extended citizenship to other people from other civilizations that had been conquered, and believe me, those people were proud to be named Roman citizens. And there's a movie called Gladiator, and in the movie, Russell Crowe is the star. He's from Spain. He has never been to Rome. He, is somebody that born and raised in Spain. The Romans had conquered Spain before the time of his birth, and so he grew up as a Roman citizen. So he fought in the Roman army, and he had a lot of patriotism and pride for the Romans, although he had never been to Italy, except partway through the movie, he ends up getting there. All right, 2 rights of the Roman citizen. So if you're a Roman citizen, you have the right to vote and the right to a trial. Those are our current rights that American citizens have as well. What are obligations or responsibilities that Roman citizens had? Well, to serve in the military and also to serve in Roman courts as legal guardians. Well, I guess I needed to spell that correctly. G-U-A-R. Spell check should disappear now. Yep. Witnesses, jurors, or judges. In the United States, there is no federal military requirement. In countries like Israel, there is. It's compulsory where you have to join the military. In the United States, we have a volunteer military at this point. There have been times that the United States has issued a draft in which people were forced to serve in the military, and that was only in times of war. I do not believe the United States would use the draft again. It was used during the Vietnam War, and it did not go very well with the American public. Matter of fact, Big Mr. Ashbaugh, which would be my dad, was actually drafted in 1969 and had to spend a year fighting in Vietnam, which I'm so glad he came back because I would not be here. Who made up the patrician class? They were the wealthy. They were the members of the oldest and richest families in Rome, usually very wealthy, controlled many government offices. Somewhere around 10% of the people of Rome made up this class, this important class called the... Oh, can I do that? Oh, that's fancy. Oh, no, I want to make it red. Let's see what happens. The patrician class. So they were the most important, usually about 10%. The other people, let's make them blue, were called the plebeians, and the plebeians were the majority of the Romans. They made up about 90% of the population. Most of them were farmers, artisans, merchants. Some were able to become very wealthy, although you pretty much stayed within the class that you were born into. There was no mobility. There were actually laws forbidding patrician and plebeian marriages for this reason. So there was no gray area between the two classes. So the patricians were where the senators came from. They called all the shots, and the plebeians were the commoners, and they made up usually around 90%. How did plebeians force the patricians to actually open up political offices to them? Because they were not able to participate in politics at first. And they did something really smart. They waited until there was a war, and when the war was going on, they went on strike. They all went up on top of a nearby hill in Rome, and they sat there. And they said, "Fight your war without us." Meanwhile, look at the percentage of the population, 90%. So the Roman senators and Roman, really, patricians knew they needed the plebeians, and so they gave them some rights. One of them we will talk about. All right, so this is one of the things that the plebeians were able to get for themselves, and patrician men would participate in these as well. They were called the assemblies. All adult males could participate. The votes of the wealthy did outweigh those of the poor, which does not sound very fair, but they elected officials and they passed laws. The most powerful branch, which we talked about before, was the Roman Senate. They were the wealthiest and best-known adult Roman men. They weren't picked by a democratic process. They were actually picked by an official called a censor, and they did not represent the people. And they were really the big bosses. They led the state, which is a fancy way to say government. They advised assemblies. They ran foreign policy. And another important role that they would have would be to be in charge of all the money, in charge of the treasury. I don't like what that bold looks like. The magistrates, today magistrates are judges, but back then in ancient Rome they were officials who were part of political elite families, and the consuls were usually chosen out of this group. And remember, 2 consuls would serve at the same time. Politicians usually moved from when they were younger to becoming older, from lower offices to higher offices, and this path was called the race of honors. And so they'd start off as a quaestor, which is sort of like an accountant, and then an aedile, which would be holding festivals and maintaining public buildings. Then from an aedile, if you were a patrician, you would move over to praetor, which is judging cases, managing the city, and leading armies. And then if you were very good at being a praetor, you had a chance to become elected to be a consul, and that's the top official, led the army, and you were the highest judge. Now you notice I skipped this one because this one is available only for plebeians. It was called the Tribune of Plebs. When they went on strike during that war, this is one of the things that was given to them. They could protect the plebeians in any type of general assembly meetings, and they also had veto power. They could veto magistrates and veto any type of decisions. Consuls and praetors had visible symbols that showed their authority. They wore special togas and sat on ivory chairs. They were followed around by these special bodyguards called lictors, which I think is a pretty cool name. Lictors. And the lictors carried around the consul or praetor's fasces, which we've already talked about is a Roman... Oh, no, the green does not look good. It is a Roman symbol of unity and power. So the lictors were pretty much like bodyguards, kind of like what Secret Service guys do for the presidents and, senators and people in the House of Representatives today. They are in charge of security, but also they carried around these fasces, which was the symbol of power. All right, there was a special role in the Roman Republic in time of emergency. It was called a dictator. And right away, we've talked about this before. You think bad guy, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. But in the Roman Republic, the dictator was not necessarily so. He was named in great emergency, in a time of great emergency, and it was when he had ultimate control. So the Senate was suspended, the assemblies were suspended, the magistrates were suspended, and this guy was the only one that would be able to call the shots. Everything was decided by this person. Really smart move on the Roman part. They made this only available for 6 months, which made a lot of sense because you did not want somebody to become dictator for life. This is one of the big mistakes Julius Caesar makes. When he gets control of the Roman government, he names himself dictator for life, and it riles the feathers of these Roman Republic diehards, the people that feel that democracy should always be there. This is one of the reasons, really the main reason, that leads to Julius Caesar's assassination. As soon as he names himself dictator for life, the Republic has sort of gone out the window, and it makes some people really mad. Why was Cincinnatus thought of as an ideal citizen? We talked about him before. He was a very successful dictator. He won all of his battles. He got Rome back on track again. And then as soon as he did, he resigned from office. Even though they were begging him to stay, he's like, listen, it's only 6 months. I got things back together. I'm going to give it up and go back and take over my farm again. And he's considered the ideal Roman, as you know from our pre-read slides and as you know from the podcast we listened to on the great Cincinnatus. Too bad Cincinnati, Ohio has crummy sports teams that I do not like, or I would really be into Cincinnatus 100%. I like him as the person. I just think that the city that's named after him, I'm not a big fan of the Bengals nor the Reds, and it seems like the Pittsburgh teams always have issues with both those teams. So I wish I could like Cincinnati more. If you're a native Ohioan, I'm so sorry that I just dissed one of your important cities. But I do love Cincinnatus, and I do love the whole cool idea that George Washington was actually called, the American Cincinnatus. So, all right, the Roman Republic was the most successful and long-lasting republic until modern times, meaning that the American Republic, although I would not consider the American Republic more successful than the Roman Republic until we make it, another 100 or maybe 200 more years. Remember, the American Republic's only been around for about 243 years, and the Roman Republic is around for about 500. It's interesting that when we start talking about the decline of the Roman Republic, they had the same kind of issues that we have here in the American style of government, but they were the most successful until the Americans put forth our republic. The writers of the American Constitution, as you already know, they knew a great deal about Roman history. They loved Roman government. They thought this was the way to do things, and so this was something that was important when they were establishing our government for our country. All right, so you were to do similarities and differences between the two governments, ours and the ancient Romans. So some similarities would be that if you were a citizen, you have the right to vote. The three branches of government, although those government branches are different, the rule of law is present, that everybody is accountable under the law. There is a veto that the President of the United States can do, and so that word veto is that Latin word to say no to, was taken from the ancient Roman government. And then also we do have a branch, not necessarily our legislative branch is not called the Senate, but the Senate makes up part of the legislative branch, and Senate actually means, the word senex means old man or experienced man, although here in the United States Senate we do have a large contingent of women. I believe it's 25 at this point out of 100. Differences: Rome's constitution is not written. Rome's democracy is different than ours. It was a direct democracy in which everybody would vote in the assemblies. We do not have a direct democracy. The United States has, maybe I make that U period S because it looks like us, is a representative democracy. We vote for the people that go and make the laws and decide if the laws are fair and just. We do not vote on those in particular by ourselves. We all have jobs, and it'll be too much time for us to go and sit and listen to all these hearings and meetings about whether this law is good or this law is good or whatever. We trust people with that job, and if they do a good job, we keep voting for them, and if they do a crummy job, we elect somebody else. In the United States, women are allowed to take part in politics, in which ancient Rome they weren't. And then also in ancient Rome, slavery was something that was accepted, and slaves had absolutely no rights. In ancient Rome, they were considered property. And here in the United States, after the 1860s, slavery was made illegal. That is it. I want to thank you for listening. We will look at some slides in class soon.